you doing, friends? I am actually just in the middle of watching the English Masters stream, which it's too late for me to tell you it's really good. You should go watch it, but it's really good. I watched it last year, had a lot of fun. Was really looking forward to it this year, so I'm staying up quite late watching that. But they're at lunch at the moment, so I wanted to do a quick video that's just sort of been running around my head for a little while with a few things that people play wrong in games. So I've set up a few situations here, and I'll just get into it. It's probably not going to be an awfully long video, if I'm honest. So over here, essentially, people move fast cav very incorrectly. Actually, let's make this a little bit more accurate. Just because at the moment, the example I was going to show you would look dumb. But let's say, yeah, unit of 5x5 Gore-Tex. Love it, baby. Oop. Let's say he's over here being a little bit annoying. All right. So if we look at these centaurs, people do this with like non-flying light troops quite a bit, where they'll basically look at the gap between things. So as we can see here, the mongrels back here have a 2-inch gap to the minotaurs, and the minotaurs have a 2-inch gap to the wild horns. So people will basically look at that and they play it. I see it played a lot as well. I'm basically a 1-inch wide base. That means that gap is small enough for me to fit through with my free reforms. That means I can get through here and I can get out to here on this side. But what you actually have to do is you have to be able to actually do the reforms. So if we're trying to go one wide, there's not even on this first gap really. Like having to abide by the 1/2 inch matters. We can get there, but there's literally no position where we're going to be able to be in one wide fitting through this gap to also get around the wild horns. Like we can it's probably about as close as we're going to get along the move. There's nowhere else that we can do that. So essentially, you can't just teleport fast cav through gaps like this. A lot of the time they can if like if these guys weren't here, they could go to here and go exactly the same. Because there's enough space there, you don't have to measure in terms of like how far this model at the back moved or anything, but you do have to be able to demonstrate the position they're getting into to get through. So here they could easily go through to like that, and even though this guy at the front has moved further, you're only actually measuring... Oh, that's wrong. That's very wrong. You're only actually measuring to where his final position is. So even if you're doing a bunch of weird reforms where he's moving back and forth, you're not measuring each time in terms of the distance that he's moved, but you do need to be able to get to each position with a reform as part of your move. So getting through a gap like this, super easy, but when things are a bit more congested like this, it's impossible to get these guys from this position through this gap to here. I see that being played wrong relatively frequently, just because people have for some reason trained to basically just look at the distance of the gap, and that's all they care about. Moving on over here to one of my bugbears that people do with bloatflies all the time. It really only matters if they have a champion. But so here we've got a unit where the champion is on the left-hand side, and they want to move 16 inches over here. But we also want to move the champion position. So saying we're moving these boys, well, wrong one, so can we get the other guys? There we go. They move 16 over here. The unit, it's entirely fine, but the champion would have to stay... Oh, where are we going? Champion would have to stay here, because otherwise the champion model... let's get one of these out just for demonstrative purposes. Otherwise, so if the champion was over here, the champion model has moved far more than the 16 that they're allowed. People do this with bloatflies all the time, because they'll be, if we go take a guy out, go to, like this is a pretty common bloatfly formation where they'll be facing like this way or something, and you'll want to bring them over. Let's just take this off. You know, I think they're 14-inch march. 14 inches over here, and turn them around. If you've got a champion, you can't. Because here you were facing this way, your champion has to be in the front rank. So if you bring him over here and go the full 14-inch distance, you can't do that. So the maximum you'd actually be able to do is get your frontage of a unit to like here instead, which is a difference of what? Like about 2 inches, basically. If they didn't have a champion, that it'd be entirely fine. Because if we're looking at it and going, there's no champ, we can go, it's probably going to be easier if I do this. We can go from here and go all the way over 14, swinging around, because what is actually happening here is this model here has gone to here. It looks like I've sort of, because I pivoted, it's kind of making the distances bad, but essentially like this model has now gone to the front, and this model has now gone to the front. But when you have a champion who has to be in the front over here and has to be in the front over here, you can't do the move that way. So it's not so much a common thing that I see all across the game, because a lot of these units that are like this don't have champions. But on like your Kestrel Knights, on your Bloat Flies, on Wild Huntsmen, this sort of thing can really actually matter. And like, you know, in a game of millimeters, 2 inches can sometimes really matter. So it's relatively important. It's not massively important, but it can be significant. And I think that if it was coming up in your games, you should probably bring it up and not just go, yes, those Bloat Flies can move 16 rather than 14. It's a pretty big boost to just give them, because your opponent's measuring things incorrectly. Over here, we've got one that happens all the time. So people set up their dogs. I'll just get these guys out of the way because they're annoying. People set up their dogs like this so that they can do this. Move down something like this, say like 15 inches, and then because you've got a short frontage, your wheel's really small. So this is actually bad. So that's okay. So 14 inches, and then it looks like basically a 2-inch wheel is getting you like blocking more stuff, because essentially rather than being only 2 wide, you're a lot wider. How long does it take? So it's basically like a 3-inch wheel to get you there. So people often do like they'll vanguard up and then they'll go 13 inches, 3 inches like that, and they're blocking, rather than just a frontage of 2, they're blocking a frontage of heaps. But similar to the last example, like none of your models can move. Like essentially, this is the exact correct way to measure a unit's movement, but you do also have to keep in mind that at the end of a move, you have to be no more than your march distance or your advance distance if you've made an advanced move away from your starting point, and that's a model to model basis. So here, this model has moved way more than 16 because the wheel there, which was measured correctly for the unit, has allowed him to move way too far. So it looks like basically we were probably... He doesn't have much room at all. So that's a massive difference there. Like you can see that final position as opposed to when it was horizontal. The final position is massive. And say I see this all the time. It's not always played incorrectly, because particularly with like the vampire counts dogs, they're March 18. They've got their Vanguard 12. Like they've actually usually got, if you're 24 inches apart, they've actually got a lot of extra sort of space. They don't need to use their full movement to do this. So they actually usually have enough, if you're 24 apart, to end up in that position where they're like this. But there are a lot of instances where people will be measuring wheels and they do it wrongly like this, basically. So in a lot of those like at deployment, you can usually do it if you're both deployed on the lines, basically. But there are a lot of situations where people will, even just if you've got a big unit, like, where are some units? If you've got a big unit, come on over. if you've got a unit like this that moves like, probably the best if we go 7 inches. These are a March 10 unit. These are wild horns. And then we wheel them 3. Oh, I'm going to have to actually duplicate so that we can see the difference between the two here. So we'll say these guys go 7 inches, and then 3 inches. I think you'll find that this guy has moved way too far. Yeah, he's moved like a full extra inch to get to that position. So that sort of stuff is, in my opinion, a little bit less important to sort of focus on, because there are so many inaccuracies. When you're measuring on a table, there are so many inaccuracies that you're doing. But when it's as significant as a dog unit like this, and when they're specifically in a formation to benefit from the fact that wheels are measured so from the front corner, like outside front corner, that's sort of usually more important. Like this, I would never pick up in a game. If it ended up something a little bit more like this, you know, where they've done a pretty harsh wheel, I quite often would pull it up. But the situation where it was before, where it was like this, it's sort of like, it's usually not important. But it is still incorrect to move them like that. If you're moving your full distance and it includes a wheel, like you can never move your full distance if it includes a wheel. You have to like take away some of your movement if you want a wheel. What was this one? Oh, this one very small. It's literally just when you're doing a swift reform, you need to abide by the inch at both steps. So if I've done this correctly, this unit could easily reform to be 6 wide because they have an inch after their reform, and then they can move their 5 inches. Everything's fine. If they wanted to reform to be 8 wide, they actually couldn't, because the end result after the reform is within 1 inch. So even though after you've finished your swift, like your reform then advance, they're outside of an inch, it doesn't matter, because you need to, after both the reform and after your advance move, you need to be abiding by the inch. So here, you can't come this close after your reform, which is something, it's almost like, it's not that people play it inaccurately, they think the other way. They just think incorrectly that they don't have, like they can come within half an inch for their swift reform, which is just incorrect. So that's why I included it here. And this is one that I see, like it sort of goes both ways. Like there's lots of times where you can do, like if I'm charging these Minotaurs and this Gortak at this Deep Watch, there's a lot of times that you can crisscross them over, depending on where the units are, depending on their facing and stuff. So here, based on this facing, there's no way that I can ever get this Gortak down to this edge. With his charge, easy peasy, he can get there. He can get there, down like that, close the door like that. But that would mean the Minotaurs, with their move, I'm sure they can still contact them, but they can't. Sorry. But there's no way they can maximize properly. So I see people all the time that just be like, oh yeah, like I've got room in between, so I'll put these guys here and I'll put the Gortak here because I want them on this side. But you actually do have to be able to make the move to get there. Same thing if you tried to do these guys first. Something like that. Something like that. So you're maximizing all your Minotaurs in. The Gortak now has no way of turning. Like there's no way that he can get in with only one wheel. So if his angle was if the Gortak was angled like this, you could easily do it, because these guys could then go in like this. Same as before. But now, because the Gortak actually clears them, he could, let's lock on the axis again. He could come down to here and then do his wheel. So in this case, you could easily cross over. But you do need to be able to actually make the moves to get there, and you need to make them one by one. So you can't always just cross over because you want to. Those are basically the 5 things that I thought of. So there's definitely more rules that other people play incorrect. There's a whole bunch of things in combat reforms that people don't know, that people... Like, there's a lot of tricks you can pull that people don't know. There's a lot of mistakes that people make in what they can do and what they can't do in combat reforms. I won't cover that because Schmid did that better than I ever would anyway on his channel. So in the description of this one, if I remember, I'll chuck a link to that in case you're interested. But yeah, these are just sort of 5 things that I see played incorrectly fairly often. So if you're interested, I hope this has helped you a little bit. Thanks, guys.